Hey guys, how's it going? I'm Duke of Italy, your favorite lo-fi, back from vacation music YouTuber, and I'm learning to change the format of these videos. I'm not going to yet, but I realize my in-depth look at all these songs is maybe not ideal. But I'll keep it going for a couple more videos just to show some off to you guys. But we're gonna keep things going because we're talking about Swans a little bit more today. We are going into their actual 90s material now. This is a awesome era. We're going to be covering a couple studio albums today that are a little bit similar to each other, but different in different ways. And it's quite an interesting period for Swans because it's arguably their most accessible period in a way, because it's also a very high quality. It's one that's kind of overshadowed a bit by their brutally crushing early industrial material, or soundtracks for the blind as one whole era, I guess you could say, or even the Trinity they get onto later. But here we're talking about the 90s era, and I'm very happy to do that because it is quite overshadowed by eras that, while you could argue have a more interesting sound to them, the quality here really speaks for itself because we are talking about White Light from the Mouth of Infinity. This is their album from 1991, and I just thought we'd get right into it because it's a cool one. You know, the cover is really interesting. It's totally different for any Swans album. You just look at it and you're like, what the heck is that? This looks very, very soft for what they're doing. And following Burning World, you know, your expectations might be a little bit low. Of course, that album is seen as kind of misaligned by a lot of people, but I don't think it's really misaligned by everybody. I think it's kind of properly lined. Basically, it's not an album that isn't worth its criticisms, but today we're approaching an album that definitely is an advancement on that sort of sound. You know, we have a lot of remaining folk elements, but also a much heavier, more pummeling, more insane sound with White Light for the Mouth of Infinity, something you were going to have that is crushingly depressing the whole time. It's like if you take the mentality of, I'd say, Holy Money and Greed, those two albums, and you condense it into a more rock-oriented sound, and you get something that I think is totally beautiful, and also one of just the most biggest slogs of an album ever, but in a way that it's clearly intentional. It's a pretty brutal album. It begins with the song Better Than You, which opens up with these bizarre baby noise samples, and then you are just given one of the craziest textures ever. You're basically given a glimpse into the entire rest of Swan's career within 40 seconds. We are just gifted with this immensely thick and hazy sound. It's just pummeling. And you have an also huge contrast here between a really repetitive yet dreamy verse and with a chorus that is totally different. There are these interesting, really overemphasized instrumental hits that are just giant and unnerving. They almost want to unwind the entire song. The meaning of the song is very ambiguous. It has something to do with mortality, but according to the entire rest of the album, I feel like it's sort of an ironic take on self-worth, because none of this album has any self-worth, and it just, the repeating of the concept of being better than you, it has to be ironic. And this goes into the song Power and Sacrifice, which is just awesome. It's this exotic, texture-filled, surging track with this really heavy bass texture. It kind of reminds me of the earliest Swans material with just how thick and clanging it is. It's not necessarily atonal, but like it definitely has a little bit of similarity to that early Swans sound. It's actually a bit groovy, which for Swans is dubious, you know. Sometimes they have it and sometimes they don't. And this is also a track that utilizes two different percussionists, which makes it sound so full. And the themes about giving up your morals for more power is, I don't want to say relatable as much as it is just universal and philosophical, and also a bit profound. It is hypnotic and full of very interesting textures. This track is exceptional. And this goes into the song called You Know Nothing, which is a really cool song because it has this really droning string sound with a very alien guitar texture. It is such a bizarre, layered composition. It feels totally otherworldly. And there is a one-to-one contrast between the verse and the chorus. They are night and day. There's also a crazy range of emotions here. I love how this song has a theme of almost wanting to burn your own life out rather than having it taken. It's actually one of the most positive songs on the whole album. It actually has this romantic, beautiful look at the world that makes it so interesting. I'm kind of surprised it isn't used at like the ending track of the album. And also, it just tacks on a whole extra minute of instrumental droning to this track, which Obviously points towards later Swans material, but here it sounds just exceptional. It's just so beautiful. The next song is called Song for Dead Time. So it starts really thick with just a crazy variety of textures, as well as this clicking percussion that reverberates for an entire measure. The alien textures just do not stop here, and we are treated to a beautiful vocal part from Jarbo. It sounds ghostly and weird, and I know a lot of people describe Swans as like gothic folk in this period, but this song epitomizes that. It sounds like it way more than anything ever could. And this song is really cool because Jarbo's singing voice is just gorgeous here, and yet the lyrics are just straight apocalypse. It's all fire and brimstone. There's nothing to even pull away from it. It's just describing the end. And next is a song called Will We Survive, which this is a song that has actually shown up on a live Swans album, but here it sounds way better, which here it has these hugely reverb, just saturated drums, and it sounds amazing. These massive hits are just everywhere. It's a highly impactful sound, and it's not dampened by really terrible recording quality. Although this album does have a bit of a raw production to the whole thing, which makes it have a weird sort of timeless sound, but at the same time it feels like so ancient. But it sounds great. Believe me. Or don't believe me, just listen to it. And we just got to talk about the lyrics here because it paints the entire song. It's about just ending your own life, imminent death, romance, for some contrast, and just sheer heavy paranoia. This is a song of woe, and this goes into the song Love Will Save You. It has these churning, repetitive drums that really keep you locked in from just the opening second. I just love that old school Swans dynamic approach here of that huge contrast between the heavy percussion and other things taking a bit of a back seat at points. This song is cool. It's a good way to start the B-side as it talks about how love is the only thing that will save you, but the key part of this track is that Michael Gira it's too late for him, and it is just a doomer track. It is this album is just grinding away at you at this point. And much like Jarbo's last appearance on this album, it doesn't sound like how incredibly doomy it is. It's got a positive side to it, which that sense of irony is part of why this album is so strong. Now, if there ever was a genre called black country, this next song would be the epitome of that. This is a song called Failure, which is a pretty lengthy, very minimalist track of just a single repeating reverb crammed guitar line and a somewhat folky vocal approach by Michael Gira, where he just talks about how everything in his whole life has been a failure, how there has been nothing good to ever happen, and none of it was even a surprise. It was just a grinding down of his soul until it reaches nothing. It is an oppressive, deeply harrowing track. It is a great song to drink to, let me tell you what. It has an almost martial, apocalyptic feeling to the whole thing, but it's also like so unapologetic in its failure. It's got kind of like, I've been listening to some Amoebics recently, the crust punk band, and it's got that same level of just apathetic self-destruction. It's kind of black metal if you think about it. And up next is Song for the Sun, which is another ironic dosage of positivity. In a way, it reminds me of Tub Thumping by Chumbawamba, just with its like, this sounds super positive, but there is conflict in here. It has themes of self-hatred, turning your back on religion. Did I mention self-hatred? It is just self-destructive. It is a brutal track. And if you can't tell, this album is thematically very consistent. And after that one is Miracle of Love, which does harken back to a sort of country-esque sound. And it has these themes of denying pleasure, which is sort of like Sex God Sex off of Children of God, which I think is a very interesting reference of themes here. That's another very good one to bring back. And it has this very looming sort of post-rock approach here, where half the song doesn't even have lyrics. It has this very foreboding and sparse and open-ended approach here. It's like it's staring you in the face without actually saying that much, literally. And the dynamic range of this track is its biggest strength. It just gets louder and louder and more bitter, which is just something. This album really takes a toll on you in like the best way possible. And then we get a track called When She Breathes, which features Jarbo with one of her most mysterious sounding vocal performances. And the entire instrumental array has 2 notes that it plays at the beginning of every 2 measures. It is super, super sparse. It is completely unsettling, warped, and weird. And the pitchy sounding piano chords, it's almost like they're detuned or old or something, is very bizarre and just adds to the alien nature of this track. And it just shows that this album is texturally so advanced for its time. It's just every little thing is manipulated to be as just harmful as possible. And this leads into the track Why Are We Alive, which is unsettling and deeply gothic. Not like Nick Cave gothic, I mean like a huge cathedral level of imposing gothic. Like you're standing right up next to a huge building and just looking up at it. But like you're inside and it's nighttime and it's storming out and there's just like a little bit of light inside. It's deeply, deeply imposing and borderline hard to breathe. Admittedly, it is what it says on the tin. It is about why are we alive? It's about pondering the reason of existence. It is maybe Swans at its most nihilistic. It is huge and daunting the entire time. And the craziest thing about this so far, I should probably emphasize this, is that this album has not once felt like overextended, but it's also not felt overly consistent. The themes have felt diverse and not like self-sabotaging in a way that is like cringe. And this actually leads us into the final track known as The Most Unfortunate Lie, which drifts in with these pretty keys and banjo until it becomes the world's biggest bummer. Thematically, it contrasts nihilism with lying to not only yourself but others as well. It is just a horrible send-off to this album, which just leaves you feeling empty at the end of the whole thing. So that is the album. I should briefly mention that the bonus track Blind is here. It is Swan's most popular song, and it's good. It's just thematically very different from this album, and also like not as thick or interesting. It feels kind of plain in comparison. But one thing important to mention for this era of Swans, this is the biggest the band has ever been up to this point, and it sounds insane. The variety of textures and the sheer density of the whole thing is awesome. It is so poetic that it is confusing. It's beautiful and striking. Basically, imagine if you took Faith or Pornography by The Cure, but you made it awesome. This album is based in red pilled, and I mean that genuinely. This album is phenomenal. And so we're going to be a bit out of order for this one. We're talking about something that was released right after White Light from the Mouth of Infinity, but it was recorded between 1982 and 1985. But its release during this instance I actually find kind of interesting because we only have 2 more studio full-length albums until we reach Soundtracks for the Blind. And this very next full-length album, just spoiler, it's Love of Life, I feel like it has some relevancy with this compilation here. This is called Body to Body, Job to Job, which is between 1982 and 1985, all these recorded bits, basically Filth and Cop and Young God and a little bit of straggling tracks on the next 2 albums, as well as a bunch of weird noise interludes and tape loops and all sorts of really interesting elements that basically, so if you like Public Castration is a Good Idea, that's Holy Money and Greed extended to like tracks double their length. It's also live and lo-fi. But here you get basically those first 3 releases extended a little bit with a lot of various other tracks. But it's slightly more raw as far as I can tell. But these noise loops add a huge contrast because you get ambient breaks between everything. And while something like Filth, being around like 30-something minutes in length, is certainly an interesting listening experience, it is far more devastating to listen to something like Public Castration. But here you get something that I think is actually more impactful. You have this huge contrast between any of the songs, for lack of a better phrase, anything that you would see off those albums, and it contrasts with these tape loops that feel subdued and empty and burning inside. It kind of reminds me of, I don't know, I probably reviewed this on my channel, oddly enough, I don't know why I'm thinking about this, but a Hulk comic, like, it's not Future's End, because I know that's DC, but like, it's where the Hulk is like, in the apocalypse and he kills Bruce Banner by being unable to transform back, and he's just like, Hulk feels cold. That's such a bizarre comparison here, but basically what I mean is this album, while you do have the brutal heaviness of Filth or the brutal heaviness of Cop or Young God. On something like Filth, it can feel just a little tiny bit overwrought, just like the film Beau is Afraid. I heard a critique of this by one of my best friends where he was like, oh, this movie, it's a little over dramatic because of it being Ari Aster's own metaphor for his own personal life with his own mother. It's a metaphor for himself, and how it's like sort of a torture flick where you're just watching Beau be put in these horrible, compromising situations all the time, and it's extremely intense the whole time. And only and keep in mind, I, Duke of Italy, really really like this movie, but he didn't. And one of his points was, with all this, he was like, "Yeah, nothing good ever happens to Beau, because nothing good ever happens to me." Like he's referring to Ari Aster. And the thing is, with something like Filth, I could see someone having that perspective. It's like, oh, nothing good ever happens to Michael Gira, blah, 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 blah. And that's an important step of Swan's career once you reach probably Children of God, but more importantly, White Light from the Mouth of Infinity. Burning World actually does it pretty well, now that I think about it. It's just that album isn't entertaining enough to really catch your attention that long, which I see now why people give that album such high reviews, but a lot of people hate it as well. It's a very controversial album, for lack of a better term. White Light from the Mouth of Infinity brings the serious dosage of self-awareness. Body to body, Job to Job, in comparison with Filth or Cop or Young God, you have the most brutal, crushing sounds, and then a good 40-second period to listen to tape collage and stare yourself down. Maybe not literally, but to just think about what you have done and consider not just the fact that this is happening to you, because that is an animal instinct. Those are very animalistic albums. It is just you either succumb to it or you're a part of it. You're either headbanging to Cop or you're covering your ears. On this one, you consider why it's happening. You consider, maybe I deserve this. Maybe some part of me did something so horribly wrong that I deserve to have this boot on the back of my neck, ushering me towards the furnace where I will be forever. Oh yeah, I had like some notes for this one. If there's any actual highlight about the music here that I would say, Norman Westberg's inclusion on this release is really nice. He has really angular guitar work that he brings that adds a lot of contrast that wasn't seen on the original releases, but it doesn't pull away from the just immense Giles Corey more weight attitude of this whole thing. It makes it just as oppressive. It just adds a little bit more flavor, and it's in a way that doesn't pull away from the original idea of those albums. Body to Body, Job to Job is genuinely my favorite thing of any of that era. This compilation is top 5 Swans listening for me. I would put it over Public Castration. Maybe not by a ton, because that album is so heavy. That album's extremely angry, that live album. It's just as pissed as possible. But this one here, as pissed as it is, you notice it's more of an inward reflection, just due to the extra contrast here. And it's a huge contrast. It's not like full range here. It's like, while those original albums were 100 and 0, now you've got like a 20 in there as well. Like you've got something subtle and ambient. It's like, I don't know, Boris and Merzbow collabs do that at points that I think is kind of interesting. I think the new Jerome's Dream album's piano interludes does that as well. It is the best usage of interludes you'll ever hear. If there's ever an album with better usage of interludes, you're probably lying to yourself, or you're just reaching the standard. This is a perfect usage of interludes, so much so that it makes those original albums formulas and makes it far less tired, where they stand up to 2024 and probably for the rest of time. And after that, we're going to talk about the 1992 album from Swans known as Love of Life, which is a huge contrast from White Light from the Mouth of Infinity, not in terms of like texture or sound. You get a lot of that, but what you do get is some actual genuine positivity here, which feels really bizarre for Swans. Not that I don't want Michael Gira to be a happy person. I do. Although maybe we'll be getting less fantastic Swans material if that does happen. I hope not. I hope he is happy, if that is anything at all. But it definitely pulls from the impact of this album. But what you do get on this album are tape loop interludes, and they're awesome. Which you get the first one as the opening track here. It's just dash dash dash, which is these chimes that are looping over themselves. It's rather cacophonous towards the end of it. It's sort of an atmospheric intro to the whole thing. I think it's certainly cool. And this goes into the song Love of Life, which is one of the most repetitive Swans tracks we've gotten in 6 years up at this point. It is immediately action-packed, filled with so many different layers. It has these hypnotic rolling snares and an almost gospel-esque sound, but a very dark version. There feels to be like a little bit of irony in this track still, even if it feels not as there on the rest of the album. The lyrics are very repetitive, and if it's not just the lyrics, it's every time they switch up, it's keeping the exact same rhythm over and over again. And the snare rolls are like the main sense of percussion here. It sounds crazy. It's super bizarre. And this goes into the track The Golden Boy That Was Swallowed by the Sea, which is this really gloomy goth rock that is just falling over itself. It has this bizarre sort of crashing, almost thunderous percussion that is kind of indicative of future Swan sounds, I think, a la 2010s. And it is very pretty. It has a lot of storytelling, and the themes are a bit esoteric and a bit hard to understand. But I can't help but say that it is missing something. It doesn't have much to really pull me in, which then we get the next interlude, which has these violin and droning textures until we reach a actual different interlude track, which has this sort of low fidelity folk track with a sound recording of a man speaking over the top of it. The atmosphere really seeps in as we reach the track The Other Side of the World, which is just this heavy, lumbering, and swelling track over just these two giant chords. It is indicative of so much of Swans' career to have these just two chords just be the whole entire identity of a song. But the main appeal of this song is the textural part. They're manipulated in such a crazy way that I couldn't tell you an instrument it actually sounds like. I could barely even tell you what type of instrument it would sound like. But they sound so alien and bizarre that this is what the atmosphere has really led you to here. Swans, for this album and the last album, have both been masters of production and recording quality to make just the weirdest sounding things. And this goes into the song Her, which this is one of the few songs that features both vocalists. This is not something you see much. If I can name a single time that happens, I think it's just on Greed and Holy Money, which Jarbo's just used as like extra texture. But it certainly sounds interesting. It is somber and also completely acoustic, as it's mostly about Michael liking Jarbo before you get this dulcimer that comes in. It turns hellish and rocking with some of the most thunderous hits. It reminds me of some future stuff we'd be seeing on Soundtracks for the Blind, until one of the weirdest transitions, we get a tape recording of actually a very young Jarbo, like a child version of Jarbo, talking about just random stuff, which the content itself doesn't really matter. It's just that it is child Jarbo, and you can tell what she's saying is just so juvenile that it really contrasts with just all of the ugliness of Swans' career so far. But you could tell the childlike innocence is gone at this point. You could tell even just with this album that there's really no accessing that anymore. It's actually not about America or movies from the past few years, but it's about letting go and caring less about things in general. It actually reminds me a lot of Golden Boy Who Swallowed the Sun. The textures are very, very similar. It's got also similar dreamy sort of surging sound of the whole thing that no other band does, but Swans here is doing particularly well, and also repeating it very clearly. It's interesting how self-destructive the themes are here, but at the same time, it's the healthiest Swans have ever sounded. And this does lead us into another interlude of the same name as the other ones, which is a rather positive recording of Michael Gira talking about loving things. And this goes into the track Amnesia, which is a track that is weird, bizarre, and uncomfortable. Bit of a contrast from the rest of this album. And the drums are looped and very mechanical and heavy sounding. It's actually very claustrophobic. It reminds me a lot of the Greed and Holy Money stuff. And as atonal as the song is, you get this really twisted, seemingly atonal in a different sense of the word, melody on the chorus that makes the song just so much more uncomfortable. This is probably one of my favorite songs on the album. And this goes into the song Identity. It's almost militant and lumbering, but the guitar chords have this almost modal, bizarre, like medieval sounding set of chords to them. It's also a song that feels almost bipolar. The emotion is constantly fluctuating on this one. It's deeply uncomfortable. And the whole time you have a sample of a child speaking over the whole track, which You can't really tell what he's saying, but it's just so bizarre. Everything about this track is super twisted. And then we get another interlude, which is just chimes mellotron. It's a total dreamscape, which is totally some proto Soundtracks for the Blind stuff, which if there's anything great about this album here, it's that so many things would show up on Soundtracks for the Blind. It's just it's not as, well, I don't want to say consistent because that album is not consistent. It's just here it feels not purposefully disconnected. It feels kind of random. It's like they're filling space when they don't know how to. And up next is the track In the Eyes of Nature. This is a song that feels cosmically huge, and the imagery is particularly strong. It is very cryptic, but from what I could deduce, it is about human existence being against nature. It is about it being in very conflict. This does remind me a lot of songs from White Light from the Mouth of Infinity, because it does have this really beautiful sound with a very harrowing concept behind it. It sort of alludes to humanity being a mark on time, like almost like a blemish or like a stain, but at the same time being so minute and like basically not mattering at all. And up next is the song She Cries for a Spider, which the textures are really nice. It has this churning mellotron with these really beautiful folk instrumentals, and Jarbo doing a great vocal performance as well. She's singing very legato. It sounds a lot like The Other Side of the World. This album definitely is looping in on itself, and it's in a way that doesn't feel like, it feels purposeful but not planned very well. It doesn't feel like it's connecting in a way that is really gratifying. And this goes into God Loves America, which is like real folk. It's like a singer-songwriter song. The most Swansy part about this track is the fact that it gets louder and doomier as it goes along, but it's just Michael Giras singing about how America has ruined the world and everything ever. And while there's nothing wrong with that from an artistic standpoint, it's just, this is by far the easiest song on the album, and it feels like, I don't know, freshman art school. Yeah, I'll describe it as that. And this goes into the final interlude of the album with this droning sort of desk bells being thrown around, as well as this really ominous woodblock percussion. It's actually sounds really cool. And the words over the top are super ominous. It's a cool way to lead us into the closing act, which is the song No Cure for the Lonely, which has this very somber acoustic guitar as well as this nice tape hiss on top. And it actually is very, very touching. I would say it's the best song on the album. It's probably one of the few that actually gets to me emotionally. It is crushingly sad compared to the rest of the album, but it also sounds starkly naked compared to the rest of the album. But the themes here are just very biting. It's almost like, despite the positivity of this album, it's just No Cure for the Lonely. This is an album that unfortunately insists upon itself too much. It needs to exist in a vacuum, and unfortunately nothing does. It is an album that you need to fully immerse yourself in to fully enjoy, but unfortunately it's just not something you're able to do all that often. It doesn't do that for itself. I give this one a Weezer. A lot of strong songs and moments here. It's just, as a whole album, it's just there's too much fat, but at the same time it needs the length that it has, because it's not super long. And before I end the video, I wanted to talk about a few live albums that came out before the next studio full length. Up first is Omniscience from 1992. It's a very beautiful live album, and it actually does what all the previous ones have done, just slightly better, because this one, being after the Love of Life cycle, is about Love of Life. It's all the Love of Life tracks, just given more reverb. It's more beautiful. It's a bit more raw production, but at the same time, it just sounds better. All the warm, gushy feelings you were supposed to get on Love of Life are really shown off here, which is so interesting how Swans operates like that. Everything they do is so bold, it really operates on like a wire. It's such a thin level of acceptance here, but this one is great. I think it's a way better version of Love of Life. It's honestly something I would recommend purchasing instead of Love of Life. And this next one's released after the next studio full length, but it's all old material from 86, 87, and 88. It's called Kill the Child. So I thought I'd just talk about it here because it doesn't really show anything in the future. It is basically Public Castration 2. It's a little bit shorter, but it includes also some Children of God material. So if you're into Feel Good Now, as well as Public Castration, this is a really good release. It kind of combines the two in a way. Jarbo showing up on the track Blood and Honey is actually a huge, crazy contrast, and one of the best things here. It actually totally unravels the sort of Feel Good Now heaviness of the that material, or especially the Screw Holy Money stuff, it changes the grounds entirely. And it's cool because Swans doesn't really acknowledge previous eras all that much, except for the beginning of their latest incarnation, which I wanted this whole time. And the ending version, and the final track here is a version of a Screw, which I think is the best version they ever did of it. It's just particularly heavy, particularly martial. This live album is great. It's honestly really good. And up next is Real Love, which this is, I'm getting way ahead of myself here. This was recorded in 1986, but released in 1996. I just didn't want to have to mention it in a future video. It's a live album that covers some really old stuff. It's literally just Public Castration 2, but in a 45-minute increment. It simply does not hit the same. It does not have the same impact as Public Castration does. I will say though, this version of A Hanging is awesome. It is droney and dare I say beautiful. The impact of it is unprecedented, and it lifts itself out of the muck of the rest of the live album. And the closer, Sealed in Skin, has piano, which the live versions of the other tracks off of Greed and Holy Money that are supposed to have piano, I just feel like you don't really hear the piano there on Public Castration or any other version. So it's nice to hear Sealed in Skin here. It's nice to have something that actually pokes out. Real Love is not necessary at all, but those couple of tracks are pretty cool to hear. It's just they're better in an album context. So however you want to do it, I mean, it's your life. You don't even have to listen to it. You could stop watching the video right now, which would be appropriate timing because we're about ending. Hope you guys enjoyed. I cannot wait to do probably one more video this year on the Swans, and then I'll probably wait till next year to start getting into the modern Swans material. But I'm going to do one more this year and talk about the next couple studio full lengths as well as an EP and a live album, and just blow you guys away because it's a really cool discussion that we're going to do. Other than that, I would appreciate a like and subscribe. Any comments, questions, or concerns down below, I would really appreciate it. I love talking to you guys about this stuff. I want to hear any of your hot takes about these albums. I love talking about Swans. It's a really, really interesting band, and they've never stopped being interesting, which is why they've lasted 44 years at this point, 42 years, 43 years, I think. But that is about it. I appreciate it. Like and subscribe. Any comments, questions, concerns, like I said before, down below. But also my social media is in the description. My Instagram, my X. I still don't like calling it X. It's Twitter, but it's what it is, I guess. And my YouTube channel's Discord page, where I post pretty often. I'm recording this on the 5th, and someone posted that it was Quebec by Ween's birthday, which is an awesome album. It's like if Failure by Swans was like dad rock, but also fantastic, because that album is just fantastic. And shoot, yeah, that's it. Hope you guys are having a good day out there. Have a good one. Bye.